My name is Joan. 2 weeks ago, at my grandfather's funeral, the atmosphere in the chapel was thick with sorrow. But what happened next was a storm I never expected. My mother, Sarah, stood up in front of 38 mourners, pointed straight at me, and shrieked, "You conniving little wretch. You stole from a dying man who could barely speak. Every penny of his fortune is going to your sister Lily, not some good-for-nothing freeloader who played nurse for 3 years." The entire chapel fell into a deathly silence. All 38 heads turned towards me. I sat there, motionless, with my hands folded on my lap, my eyes fixed on the casket. Just then, the chapel door creaked open. Mr. Thompson, my grandfather's lawyer for 20 years, walked slowly down the aisle, holding a thick sealed manila envelope. My name was scrawled on the front in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. My mother saw it, and her face turned as white as a sheet. She plopped down onto the wooden pew so hard that it groaned. Little did she know that my grandfather, Henry, had been preparing for this moment for 4 long years, and all her schemes were about to backfire. To understand this whole mess, we need to go back a few years. My grandfather lived in a beautiful 2-story house on Pine Street in Springfield. He had built that house with his own hands and had lived there for 35 years. On weekends, he loved to tinker in his workshop, making small wooden trinkets. He was a man of routine, keeping his tools neatly arranged and his medications lined up on the counter, with the time of intake written on each bottle cap in red marker. My mother, Sarah, used to be a successful businesswoman. She ran a small marketing agency, but she made some bad decisions and lost it all in 2017. After that, she became controlling and overbearing. She thought she could run the family like a business, deciding who got invited to family gatherings and who was in her good books. My father, David, was a soft-spoken man. He worked as a bank teller and always went along with whatever my mother said. He never questioned her, even when it was obvious she was in the wrong. Then there was my sister, Lily. She was 26, a party girl with a penchant for luxury. She had a huge following on social media, posting pictures of expensive vacations and designer clothes. She barely visited our grandfather in the 3 years he was ill. She only showed up twice, and both times, she took selfies and posted them online, not really caring about him. I, on the other hand, was a freelance graphic designer. When my grandfather was diagnosed with advanced Alzheimer's in 2020, I dropped everything and moved in with him. I learned his medication schedule like the back of my hand. I knew which pills to give him in the morning, afternoon, and evening. I was with him day in and day out, while my mother only came to visit a handful of times in those 3 years. One day, in 2023, my grandfather and I were sitting in the living room. He took my hand and said, "Joan, if anything ever happens with your mother, go to Mr. Thompson. Only him." I promised him, though I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. In September 2024, on his 78th birthday, he gave me a small key. He said, "Keep this. You'll know when to use it." I put it in an old book on my shelf, not thinking much of it. In November 2024, my grandfather was feeling unwell. One morning, my mother showed up unannounced, with Lily and a strange man in a suit. The man introduced himself as Mr. Harris, a lawyer. My mother said they needed to talk to my grandfather about some family business and told me to go for a walk. I refused and stayed in the kitchen. I could hear my mother's voice in my grandfather's bedroom, sweet-talking him into signing some papers. "Dad, this is just a formality. Sign here, and we'll take care of the rest." My grandfather signed, but he asked for a carbon copy. Mr. Harris hesitated, but my mother quickly agreed. After they left, my grandfather called me into the room. He was pale and weak. He pointed at the carbon copy and, with a shaking hand, wrote "signed under coercion" at the bottom. Then he whispered, "Take this to Mr. Thompson tomorrow. Don't tell your mother." The next day, I went to Mr. Thompson's office. He looked at the carbon copy and then pulled out a thick blue folder labeled Henry's Living Trust 2020. He told me that my grandfather had anticipated this situation and had prepared a revocation of my mother's power of attorney. We sent the revocation letter to my mother via certified mail. But 10 days later, she transferred $5,000 from my grandfather's savings account to Lily's account. She didn't know that my grandfather had been keeping a record of all her transactions, and Mr. Thompson's partner, Mr. Brown, a forensic accountant, had been working on a report since October. In December 2024, my mother changed the door code of the house and told the caregivers that I was no longer welcome. I was heartbroken. I couldn't see my grandfather for the last 60 days of his life. But the hospice nurse, Mrs. Jenkins, was kind-hearted. She texted me every day, telling me how my grandfather was doing. She told me that he asked for me often, but my mother always said I was away. On February 14, 2025, my grandfather passed away peacefully. I drove to the house at sunrise, but my mother stopped me at the door. "It's better if you don't come in. The arrangements are delicate, and Lily is in pieces." I stood on the porch for a while, then walked back to my car, tears streaming down my face. The funeral was set for February 24th. My mother had made all the arrangements without consulting me. When I arrived at the chapel, she was already there, speaking to some relatives. Lily was standing beside her, looking at her phone. After the pastor's speech, my mother stood up and launched into her tirade against me. But just as she was about to go on, Mr. Thompson walked in with the envelope. He walked up to me and said, "Your grandfather asked me to be here today. He gave me specific instructions." He then addressed the room. This envelope was deposited in my office on May 10, 2020. According to Mr. Henry's instructions, it is to be opened in the presence of all family members on the day of his memorial service if certain conditions are met. Those conditions have arisen. He broke the wax seal and read a letter written by my grandfather. If this letter is being read, then Sarah has done what I always knew she would. I have prepared accordingly. The details will be discussed with my attorney tomorrow. The next day, at the law office, Mr. Thompson read the trust. 10% of the residual estate was to go to a local Alzheimer's research foundation in my grandfather's name. 87% was to go to me, including the house on Pine Street and the investment portfolio. Lily was to receive a consolation sum of $10,000, but it was offset by the money she had already received. My mother and father were each to receive $1. My mother was furious. She said my grandfather had signed a different will in November. Mr. Thompson calmly showed her a duplicate of the document with my grandfather's handwritten note of coercion. He also presented evidence of the unauthorized transfer and Mr. Brown's forensic report. He warned my mother about the disqualification clause in the trust. If she contested the will, she would forfeit all her rights. But my mother, in her stubbornness, decided to fight. The court hearing was set for April 16, 2025. I drove to the courthouse, feeling nervous. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Brown were there. My mother and Mr. Harris also arrived. In the courtroom, Mr. Harris presented his case, claiming undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. But Mr. Thompson countered with all the evidence we had. The judge watched the video of my grandfather signing the trust in 2020, and Mrs. Jenkins testified about my grandfather's wishes. After a short recess, the judge ruled. She found that my grandfather had full testamentary capacity at the time of signing the trust and that there was clear evidence of coercion by my mother. The probate challenge was dismissed, and my mother was left with $1 from my grandfather's estate. After the court case, the civil recovery process began. Mr. Brown filed for restitution of the $5,000 and referred the case to the local Adult Protective Services for elder financial abuse. My mother paid back the money on the 86th day, using the proceeds from a refinance of her own house. Lily sent back the diamond earrings she had bought with my grandfather's money. She texted me, saying, "Mom made me do it." I didn't know about the account. I didn't reply. My father sent me a handwritten letter, apologizing for his silence over the years. I kept the letter in my drawer, not sure if I would ever reply. In late April, I decided to keep the house on Pine Street and the cabin by the lake. I liquidated a part of the investment portfolio and donated $30,000 to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation in my grandfather's name. I named the donation the Henry Memorial Fund for Alzheimer's Research. One Saturday morning, I drove to the cemetery. It was raining lightly. I placed a bouquet of white lilies on my grandfather's grave. I stood there for a while, thinking about all the time we had spent together. I folded my hands and said, "Grandpa, I know you saw me. You left me the best inheritance, your love and trust. My mother taught me the meaning of greed and control, but my grandfather taught me the power of preparation and justice. And I know that justice, in the end, always prevails."